Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the Hispanic Leadership Summit 2020 from We're All Human. And today is such an important conversation talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, Global Goal number 5, gender equality. And why does this conversation matter so much? We're going to go into a deep dive, not only about gender equality number 5, but really exploring the targets and indicators that contribute to the achievements, but also to better understand the red flags, the best practices, the solutions, the actions, the steps that we need to take with a particular focus on the Latina community. And so we are very excited to give you perspective, the landscape, the data overview, but also how can we use best practices, solutions for supporting the Latina advancement in society, career, and also community from a communication perspective, an advocacy perspective, and policies that will truly impact tremendous change. And with that, I am so honored and inspired to be surrounded by incredible women, Global Goal 5, even though men are a very important part of this conversation. Gender equality is not female problem. It is a social and economic issue. All of us are in this together. He for she, we for we. This is all about being better together to truly create the changes, the actions, the measurement, the accountability to make the world a more equitable place. So I would love to welcome each and every one of you. If we can start by telling me who you are, what you do, and what is your role around gender equality? Why does this matter so much? And Gina, let's start with you.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm Gina Ayala Claxton, and I lead part of our business here at IBM. I'm a general manager leading our retail and CP and travel business at IBM. I'm also part of the Hispanic Executive Council at IBM, where we're focused on advancement and engagement with our Hispanic population. Very passionate specifically about the Latina population at IBM. And I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit organization in the Bay Area, Canal Alliance, focused on helping immigrants advance, Latina immigrants advance here in the Bay Area as well. So very passionate about this topic.
Fantastic. And how about you, Raquel?
Hi, good day. My name is Raquel Tamez. I am the CEO of SHPE, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. We are the premier national organization for Hispanic students and professionals in STEM. We host the largest convening of Hispanics in STEM. In fact, we just wrapped that up a month ago, where we had a near 10,000 people in our first ever virtual convention in our 47-year history. Of my near 14,000 members, 33% of them are Latinas, are SHPTinas. And let me tell you, I was bumped up against sexism, male chauvinism, and inequality in my role as a CEO. And that is what keeps me up at night, is how are we going to continue to empower young Latinas and women more collectively in the ever-changing landscape that is our workforce.
Fantastic. Jackie, hi, how are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shelley. Thank you for having us. My name is Jackie. I'm the CEO of a full-service marketing agency and a publishing house that celebrates the life of Latinas. We have accumulated the largest collection of Latina stories in a book anthology series. And I've also been at the helm of a nonprofit organization that elevates young Latinas ages 12 to 25 for the last 6 years. It is an international organization that serves them to elevate their dreams. And no pun intended, but I'm one of the few Latina sports airplane pilots in the United States. So much like Raquel, I'm involved with a lot of STEM activities and recently published Latinas in Aviation. So a lot of the things that I do, I'm the proud publisher of Hispanic Stars Rising, this amazing collection that in collaboration with We're All Human. Thank you so much.
And I think you used a very important word, which was collaboration, the power of collaboration. Camila, how about you?
Very, very happy to be here with all of you today. So Camila Casale, I lead marketing strategy for Claro and Solutions. I've been working in the tech space my whole life. I'm from Argentina, and I also happen to lead an amazing group at the Women in Tech Miami Council that is dedicated to advance women in the tech space. Where we have the real gap today still, it's at the C-suite, focus on trying to close the gap when a woman holds like a medium, like a mid-manager position all the way up to the C-suite. So we're extremely passionate about this. Again, it's very nice to be here today with all of you.
And I remember 4 years ago when you were unforgettable, because the impact, the conversation, the actions, the solutions that you always talk about are incredibly memorable, and we're grateful for you. So thank you. Nanette, bring us home with who you are, what you do, why gender equality matters, and then if you could be kind enough to share some statistics and level set for us, give us some landscape information at the same time. That'd be great.
Thanks so much, Shelley. And let me first of all say how really thrilled I am to be here with all of you. It's really my great pleasure. By way of brief introduction, I'm heading the Communications Campaigns Division at the United Nations. And as such, we are developing campaigns on the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course also on goal number 5, gender equality. And before that, I headed the Communications and Public Advocacy Department at UN Women, the women's rights organization of the United Nations. And as a matter of fact, I was part of the original team that set up the organization, this new UN organization, when it was established in 2010. So I've had the incredible privilege to combine my professional and personal passions in communicating on gender equality. And I hope that I will continue to do it still for a long time. And I'm thrilled to be here. And I think, Shelley, you asked me to maybe give a very brief overview over the landscape as we see it at the United Nations, and also as it is reflected in goal number 5. And I think when we look at the factors that are really critical for women to enjoy equality, they fall broadly into 3 categories. And in a nutshell, that's women's voice, women's choice, and women's safety. And in all of these 3 areas, we still see significant barriers. And let's have a very brief look at it, maybe. Women's voice refers, of course, to the fact that women need to be able to participate in taking the decisions that affect their lives, that affect the lives of themselves, their families, their communities, their societies, and of course, as we are talking also today very much about the world of work, of course, also their workplaces. And here we see that we still are by far not where we would want to be. Globally, women parliamentarians, for example, only represent 25% of all parliamentarians. When we look at CEOs, we are at about 6.5% of CEOs, female CEOs at this point in time. When we look at women in senior and mid-level management positions, which may even be, an equally important or more important factor, we are looking at less than 30%. So very clearly, women's voice is not sufficiently represented. There's still a glass ceiling that needs to be addressed. When we talk about women's choice, we really talk about access to opportunities and assets so that women can live their life to the fullest. And that leads to the fact that women are often, for example, overrepresented in the informal sector, that they have less income because they are in insecure jobs, and that overall they lack access to the same opportunities as men. So this is where we see that we have to level the playing field when it comes to women's choices. And lastly, women's safety. We see that violence against women is a pandemic globally. 1 in 3 women globally are affected by violence in their lifetimes. And we see right now and during COVID how that has even increased, that we see an increase of up to 30% in some countries. In the context of COVID, we see that there is the risk of us backsliding on all of these areas, voice, choice, safety. But we also know that there are proven solutions and approaches, and I know we will be discussing them a little later still.
Fantastic, Nanette, thank you. Voice, choice, safety. I love that because it really is very clearly outlining the areas that we need to focus on, the actions that we need to take. So I would love to hear from each of you, if you could also highlight some of the barriers that you see for Global Goal 5 gender equality with Latinas, very specifically the impact on Latinas. And when Nanette talked about COVID, the disproportionate impact on women, and even more so, the greater impact on the Latina community. And Gina, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Nanette, for laying that out for us. I think in the business context, when I'm speaking with Hispanic women aspiring to advance and aspiring to grow in their careers, without exception, I get the question, how do you manage work-life balance? And I think the statistics you shared, for me, when it comes to voice, we have to help bring to the forefront this issue to give them confidence to have that voice and step into the ring, like I had to learn how to do. But I think Hispanic women are 1.6 times more likely than white mothers to be responsible for the work in the home. And I think are doing 7.6 hours per day of this unpaid labor, which is greater than any group. So I always tell people it's a journey. I didn't just wake up today and have this all figured out. You're looking at me right now after many, many years of working this muscle and having others help me reestablish the norms and expectations around me. But to me, this is one of the big barriers is people see that we must have some magical pixie dust or something that worked just for us, that we were able to advance and excel, that maybe they're not privy to. And I think this is a confidence issue, it's a perception issue, and it's something we have to really work on in the messaging and communication and mentoring that we do with our Hispanic females out there in the community.
Well, and I find it's very interesting, the word balance, because I think there is no such thing as balance. Life is not 50-50. It's not that neat. We have one life with many dimensions. Let's talk about work-life integration and how we're going to, quote unquote, do it all. Camila, what is your perspective on barriers?
So I agree with Gina. I personally believe that there are no barriers, only the ones we built ourselves, because while there are barriers as cultural, economic, educational, these ones apply also to other minorities, right? So I don't think there are specific barriers for Latinas. Latina women in general, we tend to quit before we even get the job, meaning we'll put so many barriers before even considering the opportunity, right? Most of women I also seen, they only apply for a promotion or a job position only when they check all the boxes. And men will be more than happy to apply if they meet less than 50 or 40% of them.
How about you, Raquel?
I agree with Camila that some of these barriers aren't specific to Latinas. Are there some barriers that impact Latinas more than other women or other professionals and students of color? Yes. I think there have been studies out there. ACER, the Hispanic Association of Corporate Responsibility, has done some studies where the individuals that participated in that study reported that stereotypes and bias were challenging for them in the workplace, and that just a lack of representation of Latinas and women in leadership roles, in the C-suite, in senior leadership, the lack of opportunity or access to opportunities. There is research out there that shows, that indicates that white men, for example, are recognized and promoted based on potential, whereas women and people of color are evaluated on their performance. That is significant, and that is in fact a barrier if that is in fact happening in particular workplaces. And so I think too, that there is, that Latinas in particular, we talk about mentors, I think we have mentors, but the game changers for Latinas and women, yes, mentors help, but we need career sponsors. These are the individuals that actually advocate for you. They they put you in the right place at the right time in front of the right people. Those are the career sponsors versus mentors who are there to advise you. And then not only that, executive coaches are also a game changer. But unfortunately, executive coaches are expensive, and those aren't readily made available by organizations. They're usually confined for the rock stars. And if, hey, white men are being evaluated on potential, Latinos aren't likely going to be identified as a rock star. So we're not, those executive coaches aren't readily made available to Latinas and women and women of color. So I'll stop there, but those are just some of the sort of broad barriers and some real barriers that I think women face, and Latinas in particular.
I think what's also really amazing when we talk about the imposter syndrome, what I learned recently, both men and women have those voices in their head. Men just tend to ignore them, and women let those voices get louder. Fake it till you make it, because everyone else is. They're just not, talking
right
about
on,
it.
Sister. Right on.
Right?
In fact, a lot of what I say, and I said this in Girls in Tech, my panel there, in my presentation, my keynote, that whole imposter syndrome, isn't it interesting that it's usually used for people of color and women and Latinas? I don't buy into imposter syndrome. That's a bunch of bunk. Some of the most successful executives that I know question their knowledge and where they're at and how they got there. That is normal. And why would you ever label yourself an imposter because somebody came up with that label and then all of a sudden it's being used for women and people of color? No. If you have doubts about what you know and how you got to where you're at, okay, that's normal. Lessen the gaps in your knowledge and embrace the fact that you are always going to have doubts, and get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Amen. I think, own it and push yourself forward. Jackie, what's your perspective?
Over the last almost 7 years, I've worked hand in hand with young Latinas, ages 12 to 25. And what I've noticed is that yes, all of the things that the panelists mentioned are present. The imposter syndrome, do I have what it takes? Do I have, do I deserve this? All those feelings are present in these young ladies. But one of the things that we've been able to do is expose them to extraordinary experiences. Sometimes that's what we need to do. We need to give them access so that they can connect to the music in their heart and say, I love this. But if a young lady has less opportunities than the counterpart, how is she going to be able to say, I love this career, I love this career in STEM, or whatever, whatever the case might be? So I've taken it upon myself with our board to expose them to things, taking them to Facebook corporate, one of the corporate offices here in Chicago, taking them to TV stations, taking them even flying, so they can fly a little airplane and see what it feels like, or to a racetrack. Things that we know that they just don't have the access to, in order to broaden up their universe and say, there are so many possibilities out there. And that's what I think we as leaders need to continue to do. How do we open doors? How do we create a pathway for people to connect and say, you know what, I love this. And I never even knew that I loved it because I would have never had a chance. That has been working out incredibly well for us. And I plan on continue to do that, to just give them access so that they can explore and see what's available in that ecosystem and see what they want to do.
I love that. Access to opportunity. One of the things we talk a lot about is the need to create the pathway to leadership. And most of the best leaders today are not learning their lessons from a textbook. It's experiential, and it's, based on empathy. Nanette, I'm coming back to you. What are some best practices that you've heard about, that you've experienced, case studies? If you could start us off in that area.
Well, thanks so much again, Shelley. And it's so interesting really to hear all of you. And I think it really comes back to the major challenges. But talking about best practices, I think what you mentioned just now, Shelley, is very important. There are choices to be made. And there are choices to be made that do not always require enormous resources. And again, if you look at the various areas of representation of voice and access to opportunities, one of the areas, or one fact is that is very clear, is that it needs some proactive measures for women to advance. If there are no proactive measures, we will wait for another 100 years or longer. So what we have seen, what works, for example, in women in politics and political representation, is some kind of quota or temporary special measures. Of most of the countries that have achieved the what's supposed to be a critical mass of representation of women in parliament, which is at 30%, have used at some point in time some quota. So that is an important and an effective tool to increase the number of women in representation. And as we have discussed before, it is important that women are represented so that they can shape, their lives and the lives of their societies. When we talk about unpaid care work, we want to get to equality there as well. That is, we want to get men more involved in unpaid care work, in household chores, etc. And that, of course, is very much an educational issue. And we see this very much when it comes also to the prevention of violence against women. And what is important really is that, we educate children at a young age. And that means that girls understand what their rights are and what their potential is and what their power is. And that boys understand that respect and equality are core tenets, or should be core tenets of any society. And we see this in communications campaigns, and you spoke briefly about this, that when we target particularly men, and we see a great difference in men under 40 and over 40. That being said, when it comes to safety, for example, when it comes to violence against women, of course, what we do need is resources for services. Women need to have access to services. We need legislation, and we need laws to be enforced. So that is absolutely critical as well. But for prevention, education is key.
Thank you, because those were real action-oriented, best practices, and we'll go to some concrete actions as well. Let's go to Gina, if you can give us some best practices.
Yeah, so on that thread, I think Raquel's point about women needing career sponsors, not just mentors. And we know that Hispanics specifically say, 66% say they have to work harder, feel like they have to work harder because of their Hispanic identity, and women, it's even higher than that. One of the things that I always talk to women about is your brand. So we do a lot of brand work throughout the course of their careers to really articulate your unfair competitive advantage, which includes all of these amazing attributes from your life experiences and your achievements being a Latina in this country, because people think they have to kind of just completely put that aside, and having them articulate that to the non-Hispanic majority in like 3 sentences, high impact. Hit them with it right up front. We do a lot of that work with people because it's the way that they're going to get that non-Hispanic majority sponsorship and attention. And, typically as culturally, we're more timid. We don't like to, celebrate ourselves very publicly. We don't want to, there's all these, generalizations. We don't want to, brag about our achievements. But using all these life skills, the fact that we also have, higher statistics of running households at the same time as we're running all of the amazing, using this in a brand, very net brand message about yourself that you bring with your sponsor to the non-Hispanic majority and say, I'm here, I deserve to be here. Actually, I'm really different because of all this. And, you want me as a part of your team. And I can't tell you how much people just are so impacted by this. They're not used to doing it. They didn't even think about doing it. They don't like to do it. It's a little uncomfortable. But once they have that package and they can sit next to someone on an airplane, or they can run into someone on an elevator and just have that ready to go, I think it really helps them with the confidence to have that voice and to be in the ring and to be in that room.
You know, I really believe that our differences are our greatest strength, and taboo topics for women, money, power, and of course, bragging about ourselves. Oscar Wilde says, be yourself, everyone else is taken. It is so important to celebrate your strengths and own your strengths and not be, if you can't be confident about yourself, no one else will. So thank you. Very important insights. Raquel.
Shelley, you touched a little bit about when you mentioned, being able to advocate for yourself and take credit. And so I oftentimes talk about redefining humility. And I don't buy into, the version of humility where, people expect women and people of color to be nose to the grindstone, don't rock the boat, subservient in a way. I subscribe to ambitious humility. I think it's important to have a healthy dose of humility, but I encourage my SHPTinas and my members, toot your own horn, just don't blow it. So you have to be able to take credit for the work that you're doing, but do it with grace, right? And a dash of humility. With respect to Gina talking about brand, no doubt. I mean, there are three aspects to brand. Your executive presence, your gravitas, your personal style. And as far as executive presence, one of the things that I focus on at SHIP with all of our members, but certainly our SHPTinas, is effective communications, verbal, written. It's so very important, especially for engineers, right? Somebody asked me, what's the difference between lawyers and engineers? Because I'm a lawyer. Communications, how we communicate is very different. And how do you then transform your effective communications once you get there to advocacy and influence? I think that's important to be able to translate effective communications to advocacy for yourself and others, and be able to influence in a positive way. And then I really appreciated Nanette's comments about being proactive, right? About the gaps, to close the gaps with gender equality. And I oftentimes say, we have to be intentional about diversity and inclusion and equity. If we're not intentional, then we're unintentionally excluding. And if there's one thing as far as workplace, and I work, SHIP has 50 of the best companies as industry partners. We have an industry partnership council. And they oftentimes ask me, if there's one thing that we could do, what would it be? And I tell them, mind the middle. Middle management matters. And they're often neglected. And so if there's one thing that workplaces and organizations can do, is really focus on the middle.
Oh, amen to that. I call that the messy middle. And so, middle management is such an important piece. And, okay, Camila, let's go with you on best practices, and then we're going to wrap with quick action steps, if you can all share them. So I'm giving you a little heads up since I go off script. Camila, all you, best practices.
I personally believe that the most effective to create a more diverse workforce is for senior leaders to recognize that it matters and to make it a priority. This has to be embedded into the company cultures. It's not about what you say, it's about what you do. So when it comes to gender equality in the workplace, I believe that the real issue that we have today and that we need to solve is how do we create more women leaders. Companies cannot afford losing women leaders. The research has been, shown that companies with women well represented, they tend to perform 50% more than their peers, right? So especially right now in the midst of the pandemic, I would say there are a few areas that companies could focus or put more attention on. I think that especially for working moms, I'm a first-time mom. I had my baby back in January. When the pandemic hit us in March, I was, thank you. I was, just back from maternity leave, trying to deal with everything. My husband happens to be a frontliner. So imagine the situation at home, right? Me with a leadership role, with a newborn, my husband working, 14 hours a day trying to save lives. When I came back, I felt that I was failing at both as a mom and as a leader, because I had to do everything with no help whatsoever. But as days passed by, I realized that I was not the only one, right? Our Zoom calls now had pets, kids. So, and then I realized that we have become more humans, right? That it doesn't matter the role you hold, we're on the same boat. So, and a few other best practices that I would like to share. I think we as leaders, we need to do our part in building the pipeline, growing the pipeline. We can partner with high school, universities, association, internships. And I also believe that it's time for companies to be more transparent when it comes to the progress in this matter. We need to open up numbers, guys. We need to be able to see real data to see how the progress is going. And last but not least, I think we need to build more communities for women to share experiences, exchange ideas, and especially have access to these role models, because that's one of the other barriers that I see. We don't have enough role models to see that it's possible to get there, that you don't need to choose to be a mom or hold a C-suite role.
Well, I mean, you just said it best as Claudia Edelman and her whole company. We are all human. We are humans doing the best that we can be. And a quick wrap, action steps. But I would love to focus these action steps on advancing equality, advancing Latinas. Action steps, quick wrap up. Nanette, bring us home with some action steps for Latinas.
Well, I think action steps for everybody. And we have talked a little bit about how it's also individual action is important and to be a little more forthright and forthcoming. But I think what's really important is to see that we change the structures that hold women back. And I think as leaders, it's upon all of us to see where we can change those structures. And I think this is what's important for us to keep in mind and what we should take away as an action step, each in our own sphere.
Fantastic. Gina.
I would say we need to seize this moment, because the events of the summer have obviously caused an awakening, especially of business leaders, to actually come out in front and take a position on racial inequality in this country. And while we need to make sure that maintains as a movement, not a moment, we need to step up really strongly with the Hispanic agenda, and more specifically the Hispanic female agenda, while our leaders are taking such bold advocacy positions. In the case of IBM, our CEO has been transparent this year. He decided to release those numbers, Camila, for the first time. So transparency in the wake of all that's happening. He's reached out to the President-elect Biden, advocating for the restoration of DACA and other programs, the DREAM Act, right? Very, very publicly. So now we come right behind that right now with these agendas that you said we've been fighting for our Latina population, while everyone's listening. And it has to be, very net, just a few things. We're focused at IBM on our P-Tech program, which is an education program for underserved communities, ensuring that they get access to educational programs and then a career in tech. 40% of those students right now in the US are female. So more funding for that, right? What really actionable things while everyone is listening. So right now, my advice is we have to seize this moment and make sure that we put sustainable things in place so that we can actually take advantage of the fight and the allyship that's happening right now.
Fantastic. Jackie.
Families. I have been, doing platforms of storytelling through books, through board games that elevate the conversation of the Latino population. And I think that this is our time to be more conscientious, be more intentional about elevating our voices, elevating our stories, and encapsulating our intellectual property so that we can be recognized for that. So that would be my action step. Start writing, start sharing, be proud, encapsulate your knowledge, your experience, your intellectual property, because this is our time as a community.
Fantastic. Raquel.
No doubt, this is definitely our time. And I often say the future is female, el futuro es Latina. And like Gina said, we need to really maximize the moment, seize the day, seize the moment. And for practical advice, I think if we all hone comprehensive communication skills and we learn the facts, and then we're able to go out and articulate and advocate for positions and positioning, we will all be better off.
Fantastic. Camila, do you have any last words, any action steps beyond the ones you just gave?
I think it's important to focus on the fact that limiting access to women or any group means that the business misses out on perspectives, experiences, and outlooks. So if you can frame and validate the issue as an opportunity for the business to succeed rather than an obligation for business to be fair, I think it changed the nature of the discussion 100%.
All right, well, I think this has been the most remarkable conversation filled with action steps. You know, the biggest problem I have sensed in this industry is we talk about the problems, but it is time to activate the solutions for change, measurement for accountability. We need a conscious mindset for taking the next steps towards impacting change. We need to close the gaps, parity policy pipeline, and in the people, you know, making sure we map the pathway. And for the Latina community, we need to have a very focused choicefulness with intentionality, as you all mapped out. Muchas gracias por todos sus opinions. Yo no sé cómo se dice en español todos, pero corazón. With all of my heart, I am so grateful for all that you do, and we are so honored to be part of the Hispanic Leadership Summit. And Claudia Edelman, you are el mucho gusto más bonita persona en el mundo. We are all human, so important. So thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful.